we have spent several videos examining the Great Pyramid, the void above the Grand Gallery, the sealed corridor discovered in 2023, the King's Chamber with its empty granite box, the Queen's Chamber with its sealed shafts and unopened doors. We have spent videos beneath the Sphinx, the underground chambers detected by seismic surveys, the rectangular cavity beneath the left paw, the passage that descends into the bedrock behind the Sphinx's head. In each case, we were looking at one structure, one location, one set of anomalies. But there is a question that this series has been circling around without asking directly. What if the structures are not separate? What if the Great Pyramid, the Sphinx, the subsidiary pyramids, the temples, the causeways? What if the entire Giza Plateau is not a collection of individual monuments built independently over centuries, but a single integrated complex connected below ground by a network of tunnels and passages that have never been fully mapped? What if Giza, above ground, is the visible part of something much larger? And what if the larger part is below? This is not a theory invented by alternative researchers. It is a question raised by the physical evidence beneath the plateau itself. Evidence that has been partially explored, selectively published, and systematically kept from the kind of comprehensive investigation that would answer it definitively. The hidden tunnels of Giza are not a single mystery. They are a system. And understanding the system changes everything we think we know about what Giza was built to be. Begin with the Osiris Shaft. It sits between the Great Pyramid and the Sphinx, in an area of the plateau that tourists rarely visit and that receives almost no attention in popular accounts of Giza. Its entrance is a simple hole in the bedrock, easy to miss, easy to walk past, unremarkable from the surface. Below the surface, it is anything but unremarkable. The Osiris Shaft descends in 3 stages. The first level, approximately 9 meters below the surface, contains a series of burial niches cut into the rock, chambers where sarcophagi were once placed, now empty. The stonework is rough, the chambers clearly functional rather than ceremonial. The second level, approximately 15 meters below the surface, is more elaborate. It contains a rectangular chamber, larger than those above, with more carefully cut walls, more empty niches, more evidence of use that has been stripped of whatever it once contained. The third level is where the shaft becomes genuinely extraordinary. At approximately 30 meters below the surface, 30 meters in bedrock below the desert floor of the Giza Plateau, there is a chamber partially filled with water, dark water, still water, water that has no known source and no known drainage. In the center of the waterlogged chamber, rising from the water, is a rectangular island of rock, and on that island, a granite sarcophagus, empty, lidless, sitting in the dark at the bottom of a flooded shaft 30 meters below the most studied archaeological site on Earth. The shaft was explored in 1999 by a team under the supervision of Zahi Hawass. The findings were published, briefly, selectively, without the comprehensive documentation that a discovery of this nature would normally generate. Hawass concluded that the shaft was a symbolic tomb, a cenotaph for Osiris, built during the Late Period or the Site Period, containing ritual objects associated with the god of resurrection. The water, he suggested, was the primordial waters of Nun, the chaos that preceded creation in Egyptian cosmology, deliberately introduced into the chamber to complete the symbolic program. The sarcophagus was empty because it was always meant to be empty, a symbolic tomb for a god who couldn't be physically buried. This explanation is consistent with Egyptian religious practice. It is also, like so many explanations in this series, insufficient, because 30 meters of bedrock does not get flooded with standing water through symbolic intent. The water is real. Its source is unknown. And the flooded chamber at the bottom of the Osiris Shaft connects through passages that the 1999 exploration did not fully trace to something further in the rock, something that the published report does not describe, something that Hawas's team found at the end of their exploration and chose not to detail publicly. The shaft goes deeper than 30 meters. Where it goes, nobody has officially said. In 2009, a British researcher named Andrew Collins was working at Giza with a small team, examining areas of the plateau that had not been the focus of recent systematic investigation. Collins was not a mainstream archaeologist. He worked outside the institutional framework of professional Egyptology. His conclusions have been disputed by mainstream researchers, and his methods have been questioned. But what he found in 2009 was not a theory. It was a cave. Working from 19th century records of the plateau, specifically from the notes of Henry Salt, a British consul general who had explored the Giza area in the 1820s. Collins located an entrance to a cave system that Salt had described, but that subsequent researchers hadn't followed up on. The entrance was in the cliff face to the west of the Great Pyramid, in an area of the plateau that is now largely off limits to tourists. Collins and his team entered through the narrow opening and found themselves in a natural cave system, not cut by human hands, but formed by geological processes in the limestone bedrock of the plateau. The caves extended for over 100 meters. They were not simply natural formations. At points along their length, the natural cave walls showed signs of human modification. Areas where the rock had been worked, where passages had been widened or redirected, where the natural system had been deliberately incorporated into something larger. The caves connected to artificial passages, passages that led further into the plateau, further than Collins and his team were able to follow before their access was restricted. The Egyptian Supreme Council of Antiquities was informed of the discovery. Collins published his findings. The discovery received some media attention, not the global coverage that a comparable find at a more prominent location might have generated, but enough that the existence of the cave system became part of the public record. And then, in the pattern that this series has documented again and again, the investigation stopped. Collins wasn't given permission to return and map the full extent of the system. The Egyptian authorities did not commission their own comprehensive survey. The caves were acknowledged to exist. Their full extent remains unknown. The Giza Plateau sits on a foundation of limestone, specifically Eocene limestone, formed from compressed marine sediments over millions of years. This limestone is honeycombed by nature. Water moving through limestone over geological time creates voids, passages, and cave systems through a process called karstification. The limestone beneath Giza has been subject to millions of years of this process. Natural cave systems beneath the plateau are not surprising. They are geologically expected. What is surprising, what transforms the natural caves from a geological curiosity into something more significant, is the evidence that these natural systems were identified, modified, extended, and incorporated into the architecture of the plateau by the people who built Giza. Warren's shafts, excavated in the 19th century, showed that the builders of the ancient structures at Giza were aware of and used the natural cave systems. Charles Warren, tunneling beneath the plateau in the 1860s, found passages and chambers that combined natural and artificial elements, places where human hands had worked with the existing geology rather than against it. The Osiris Shaft descends through layers of limestone to a depth where natural water accumulation occurs, suggesting that whoever built the shaft chose its location specifically because of the water table, specifically because of the natural hydrogeological conditions of the rock. And the Collins Caves, connecting to artificial passages that extend further into the plateau, suggest that the network of underground spaces at Giza is not a collection of separate, independent tunnels dug for separate purposes. It is a system, designed to work with the natural geology, extended and modified by human intervention, connecting points across the plateau in ways that the surface structures alone do not reveal. Here is what a comprehensive map of the underground at Giza would need to include: the Osiris Shaft and its flooded lower level, with whatever passages extend beyond the point documented in the 1999 report; the Collins Cave system and the artificial passages it connects to, and wherever those passages lead; Warren's shafts, partially mapped in the 1860s and not comprehensively re-examined since; the anomalies detected beneath the Sphinx enclosure by the Stanford Research Institute survey of 1977, the Japanese seismic survey of the 1990s, and the ground-penetrating radar surveys that have been conducted but not fully published; the void above the Grand Gallery and the corridor discovered in 2023, and whatever spaces they connect to within the pyramid structure; the subterranean chamber beneath the Great Pyramid itself, the rough, apparently unfinished room cut into the bedrock below the pyramid's base, whose relationship to the rest of the underground system has never been mapped. Each of these has been individually acknowledged. Each has been partially explored. Each has generated findings that were published selectively and not followed up comprehensively. None of them has been connected to the others in a systematic, published survey, because that survey has never been commissioned, because commissioning it would require acknowledging that there is a system to be mapped, and acknowledging the system would require explaining why it exists, how it was built, and what it was built for. Questions that the current narrative of Giza as a royal cemetery cannot answer. There is an ancient Egyptian text that describes Giza in terms that conventional archaeology has never been able to reconcile with the visible surface structures. The text refers to Giza by its ancient name, Rostau, the gateway to the underworld, the entrance to the realm of Osiris, and it describes Rostau not as a place of burial, not primarily, not essentially, but as a place of passage, a place through which the dead travel on their way to the afterlife, a threshold, a crossing point, a location where the world above and the world below intersect. In Egyptian religious geography, Rostau was not simply where the pyramids were. It was where you went down, down into the earth, down through the passages, down through the layers of the underworld that Egyptian mythology described in extraordinary detail. The gates, the guardians, the chambers, the lakes of fire and the fields of reeds, and the hall of judgment where the heart was weighed against a feather. The entire architecture of the Egyptian underworld is described in texts like the Amduat and the Book of Gates as a physical place, not an abstraction, not a metaphor, but a geography that could be traversed, mapped, described in the kind of precise directional detail that suggests actual knowledge of actual spaces. Spaces beneath the ground, beneath Rostau, beneath Giza. What if the texts were not describing mythology? What if they were describing the tunnels? The question this video is asking is not new. Researchers have been asking it for over a century. Edgar Cayce described an underground complex at Giza. 19th century explorers documented passages and chambers they could not fully explain. Modern survey teams have detected anomalies that match the locations of structures described in ancient texts. The question is not whether the tunnels exist. Multiple independent lines of evidence confirm that something significant is below the plateau. Geological surveys, seismic data, ground-penetrating radar, the physical discovery of the Osiris Shaft, the physical discovery of the Collins Caves, the documented passages mapped by Warren in the 1860s. The question is whether they form a system, and whether that system was designed, and if it was designed, what it was designed to do. The answer to that question sits below the Giza Plateau, in flooded chambers 30 meters below the desert floor, in cave systems that extend further into the limestone than any published survey has followed, in passages that connect the Great Pyramid to the Sphinx, to the subsidiary structures, to the causeways in an underground architecture that the surface view of Giza does not reveal. The system is there. The evidence for it has been accumulating for over 100 years. And the comprehensive investigation that would map it, that would connect the dots between the Osiris Shaft and the Collins Caves and the Warren passages and the seismic anomalies and the ground-penetrating radar results and the ancient texts that describe the underworld of Rostau in precise geographical detail. That investigation has never been commissioned, has never been permitted, has never been done. Because the answer it would produce, the map of what is actually beneath Giza, would not fit inside the story we have been telling about what Giza is. A cemetery for dead pharaohs, a collection of tombs, a monument to the ambition of 3 kings who wanted to be remembered. The tunnels tell a different story, and the story the tunnels tell is one that the archaeology of the surface has been, for over a century, declining to hear. Below the plateau, in the dark, in the water, in the limestone, honeycombed by millions of years of geological time, and then shaped by human hands that understood something about this place that we have not yet recovered. The system waits, unmapped, unacknowledged, asking the same question that this series has been asking from its very first video. What is down here? And why won't anyone look? There is a specific detail about the Osiris Shaft that the 1999 exploration report mentioned briefly and then did not pursue. At the 3rd level, the flooded chamber 30 meters below the surface, with the granite sarcophagus on its island of rock in the dark water, there are passages. Not one passage. Passages. Plural. Leading out from the flooded chamber in multiple directions. The 1999 team documented the chamber and the sarcophagus, They noted the passages. They described them as leading to additional chambers. And then the report moves on. The additional chambers are not described. Their contents are not listed. Their dimensions are not recorded. Their relationship to the rest of the underground system at Giza is not analyzed. They are simply noted as existing. And then the investigation ended. Whatever is in those additional chambers, whatever the passages from the flooded room at the bottom of the Osiris Shaft lead to, is not in the public record. This is not unusual in the archaeology of Giza. The pattern of partial disclosure, of finding something significant, noting it, and then not following it to its conclusion, runs through the entire history of underground exploration at the plateau. Warren found passages and was ordered to stop. The 1977 Stanford survey found anomalies and was not permitted to investigate further. The 1990s Japanese survey found a rectangular chamber beneath the Sphinx's left paw and was not given permission to excavate. The 1996 research team found what they believed was a tunnel entrance near the Sphinx and had their permit revoked. Collins found caves in 2009 and was not allowed to map their full extent. The 1999 Osiris Shaft team found passages leading from a flooded chamber at 30 meters depth and did not follow them. Each case is individually explicable. Permits expire. Resources run out. Access is restricted for legitimate reasons. But the cumulative effect of these individually explicable stoppages is that the underground system at Giza, which multiple independent lines of evidence confirm is extensive, is partly artificial, and is partly connected, has never been comprehensively mapped. Not once. In over 100 years of modern archaeology, at one of the most studied sites on Earth. Consider what a comprehensive underground survey of Giza would require. It would require permission from the Egyptian authorities to enter and map all known underground spaces, the Osiris Shaft, including its lower passages, the Collins Cave system, and the artificial passages it connects to, the subterranean chamber beneath the Great Pyramid, the passages documented by Warren in the 1860s. It would require geophysical surveys, ground-penetrating radar, seismic tomography, muon tomography, conducted systematically across the entire plateau, not just at individual monument sites. It would require the publication of all existing survey data, including the Stanford Research Institute data from 1977, the Japanese seismic data from the 1990s, and any radar or seismic surveys conducted by the Egyptian authorities themselves that have not been made public. And it would require the willingness to follow whatever the surveys reveal, to enter, document, and publish findings from chambers and passages that current surveys have detected, but that have not been officially entered. None of this is technically difficult. The technology exists. The expertise exists. The funding could be found. What does not exist, what has not existed for the entire century of modern archaeology at Giza, is the institutional will to do it. The institutional will to ask, comprehensively and honestly, what is beneath the plateau, and to publish, comprehensively and honestly, whatever the answer turns out to be. In Egyptian religious tradition, the underworld was not a place of punishment. It was a place of transformation. The dead did not go to the underworld to suffer. They went to be changed, to pass through the gates and the guardians and the chambers of the Duat, to have their hearts weighed, to emerge on the other side as something other than what they had been in life. The underworld was where the work happened, where the essential process of death and rebirth, of dissolution and reconstitution, of ending and beginning took place. And this underworld, described in the Amduat and the Book of Gates and the coffin texts and the pyramid texts in extraordinary geographical detail, was located at Rostau, at Giza, below the pyramids, below the Sphinx, below the sand of the desert and the limestone of the plateau and the water of the underground aquifer. The ancient Egyptians did not describe this as metaphor. They described it as geography, as a place that could be entered, traversed, mapped, and exited, a place with specific chambers and specific passages and specific guardians at specific gates, a place that, if you knew the right paths and spoke the right words and carried the right knowledge, you could navigate. The tunnels beneath Giza may be the physical infrastructure of this place, not the symbolic representation of the underworld itself, built by people who understood something about consciousness, about transformation, about the relationship between the living and the dead and the not yet born, that we have not yet recovered. Built to last, built deep, built connected, pyramid to sphinx, to shaft, to cave, to passage, to chamber, in a system whose full architecture we have not yet mapped and whose purpose we have not yet understood. The tunnels are there, the evidence is there, the technology to map them is there. And in the dark below the Giza Plateau, 30 meters below the desert floor, in a flooded chamber at the bottom of a shaft, named for the god of resurrection, with a granite sarcophagus sitting on an island in the black water. The underworld is waiting, as it has always waited, as it was built to wait, for whoever is ready to descend and brave enough to follow the passages to their end.